Matthew was a tax collector, one of the most despised professions in first-century Jewish society. Tax collectors worked for the Roman occupiers and were considered traitors by their own people. This background matters because Matthew wrote his gospel specifically for a Jewish audience, people who knew the Hebrew scriptures well and were waiting for the promised Messiah. Matthew opens with a genealogy, 42 generations tracing Jesus directly from Abraham, the father of the Jewish nation, through King David. Throughout his gospel, Matthew quotes the Old Testament more than any other gospel writer, over 60 direct quotations and hundreds of allusions. Again and again he uses the phrase, "This happened to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet."
Matthew is also the only gospel that contains the Sermon on the Mount in full. 3 complete chapters covering the Beatitudes, the Lord's Prayer, and Jesus' teaching on anger, lust, oaths, fasting, and worry. He is the only writer who records the visit of the Magi from the east, the massacre of the children in Bethlehem ordered by Herod, and the flight of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus into Egypt. He is also the only one who records the death of Judas by suicide, and the only one who records the guards being placed at the tomb and the bribing of those guards after the resurrection. Matthew presents Jesus primarily as the king, the promised ruler from David's line who has come to establish his kingdom. Mark is the shortest of the 4 Gospels. It has 16 chapters compared to Matthew's 28. It contains no birth narrative, no genealogy, and no account of Jesus' childhood.
It begins with a single sentence, the beginning of the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. And then it moves immediately into action. Mark was not one of the 12 apostles. According to early church tradition recorded by Papias, a 2nd-century bishop, Mark was the interpreter of the apostle Peter and wrote down Peter's accounts of Jesus' ministry. This explains the gospel's character. It reads like eyewitness testimony, vivid and immediate. The word immediately appears over 40 times in Mark's gospel. Mark wrote primarily for a Roman audience, people who valued action, directness, and results over lengthy argumentation. Where Matthew builds a legal case, Mark tells a fast-moving story. Mark records details that suggest eyewitness memory. He notes that the grass was green when the 5,000 were fed. He records that Jesus looked around at the crowd with anger and deep distress. He describes the blind man Bartimaeus throwing off his cloak before running to Jesus, a small detail no one would invent. Mark is the only gospel that records Jesus being unable to do many miracles in his hometown because of the people's lack of faith. He is also the only one who records that when Jesus was arrested, a young man who had been following him fled naked into the night, a detail so strange and specific that many scholars believe it was Mark himself. Mark presents Jesus primarily as the servant, a man of action who came not to be served, but to serve.
Luke is the longest of the 4 Gospels. It is also the first part of a 2-volume work, the 2nd volume being the Book of Acts. Together, Luke and Acts make up more of the New Testament than any other single author, including Paul. Luke was a physician, according to the Apostle Paul's letter to the Colossians. He was almost certainly a Gentile, making him the only non-Jewish author in the entire New Testament. He wrote for a Greek audience, addressing his gospel to a man named Theophilus, and he opens by explaining his method. He carefully investigated everything from the beginning and consulted eyewitness accounts. Luke's gospel contains more material unique to itself than any other gospel. The parables of the Good Samaritan, the Prodigal Son, the rich man and Lazarus, the persistent widow, and the Pharisee and the tax collector appear nowhere else. The account of Zacchaeus climbing a tree appears only in Luke. The story of the 10 lepers and the fact that only one, a Samaritan, returned to give thanks
appears only here. Luke gives more attention to women than any other gospel writer. He alone records the birth of John the Baptist and the song Mary sang when she learned she was pregnant. He records by name women who traveled with Jesus and supported his ministry from their own resources: Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Susanna. Luke also gives more attention to the poor, to outcasts, and to those on the margins of society. The shepherds who receive the birth announcement are laborers, not royalty. The Magnificat, Mary's song, speaks of God lifting up the humble and sending the rich away empty. Luke presents Jesus primarily as the Son of Man, a universal Savior who came for all people, not only for the Jewish nation. John. John's Gospel is unlike the other three in almost every way. Scholars call Matthew, Mark, and Luke the synoptic Gospels, from the Greek word meaning seen together, because they share a large amount of common material and follow a similar structure. John shares almost none of it. John contains no birth narrative, no baptism of Jesus, no temptation in the wilderness, no transfiguration, no exorcisms, no parables, and no institution of the Lord's Supper at the Last Supper. Instead, John records Jesus washing the disciples' feet, an account found nowhere in the other three Gospels. John begins not with a genealogy or a birth story, but with a theological statement. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He is placing Jesus before creation itself, identifying him with the divine Word through whom everything was made. John records 7 miracles that he calls signs, and 6 of them appear nowhere else. The turning of water into wine at Cana, the healing of the man born blind, and the raising of Lazarus are all unique to John. John also records 7 I am statements. Jesus saying, "I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way and the truth and the life. And I am the vine." John devotes 5 full chapters, chapters 13 through 17, to the final evening Jesus spent with his disciples before his arrest. No other gospel comes close to this level of detail for that single night. John was written later than the other 3 gospels. Early church tradition consistently identifies the author as John the Apostle, the son of Zebedee, writing in his old age. He assumes his readers already know the basic story. He is not repeating what the others recorded, but filling in what they left out and going deeper into the meaning of what Jesus said and did. John closes his gospel with a statement that makes clear the selection was deliberate. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. John presents Jesus primarily as the eternal Son of God, the divine Word who became flesh and dwelt among us.